Well, welcome everyone to this webinar on zero carbon buildings. It's one of many that Cundall are presenting around the world today as part of World Green Building Week. So before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia on which we are all presenting today, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. So my role in this webinar is to provide a sort of brief introduction to zero carbon buildings and then to introduce the speakers today. We'll be presenting a range of case studies on a number of projects that are all achieving or being designed to achieve zero carbon. We'll be answering questions at the end, so please type in any questions in the Q&A box you have as you think of them, and we'll cover as many as we can at the end of the proceedings. So, but first, obviously, the obligatory advertorial. Cundall, we're a multidisciplinary consulting engineering practice. We've got offices around the world, and we've got 5 offices in Australia. We provide building services engineering, sustainable design, lighting design and acoustics design on a wide range of projects and across most sectors. So why is getting to zero carbon so important? Well, the science has been predicting where we would find ourselves for years. And while many have ignored this, it's been right so far, and there's been no signs really that we're flattening the curve, let alone making the dramatic cuts we need to achieve the Paris targets of 1.5 to 2 degrees C. Without significant change to business as usual, we're going to be sailing over the 3 degrees target in the next 50 years or so, and we're already experiencing what just 1 degree temperature rise looks like. So most of us attending today are going to see this change during our lifetime, where we keep breaking historical climate records every year, you know, where we're going to see 50-degree temperatures in Australian capital cities on a fairly regular basis. Buildings and communities are going to need to be designed to cope with more extreme temperatures, droughts, bushfires, storms and floods. And what we're seeing as a result of all this is communities are getting very concerned. There's a lot of community action, protests are increasing, and companies' reputations and social license to operate is going to be challenged like never before. We're seeing investors and shareholders taking action. You know, more and more companies are refusing to invest in fossil fuel projects and calling on boards to take climate action seriously. You know, many financiers, insurers and consultants have pulled out of their involvement in the Adani coal mine due to both community and investor pressure. Yeah, and you know, this year the world's largest fund manager, BlackRock, said it would make climate change central to investment decisions. Although you know, a lot of these things, words have possibly yet got to be translated into meaningful actions. But I think the sentiment is there, and the movement is really starting to take hold. Organisations around the world have set themselves zero carbon or science-based targets. And many are already significantly on the way to achieving zero carbon well before the 2030 or 2025 targets that they set themselves. And this includes many of Australia's leading property funds. A number of these have signed up to the net zero carbon building commitment. Cundall were very proud to be founding signatories of this, and this is an initiative that's growing year on year. So we've so far there's about 76 organisations, 28 cities, and 6 states and regions have signed up to this commitment, which is basically to transparently report your carbon footprint, to reduce your energy consumption, and to source all the energy from renewables. And then all government states and territories in Australia have either committed to net zero carbon by 2050 or are working towards this. You know, obviously words need to be turned into action, but recognising the issue and then setting a goal is the first step to really tackling a problem. You know, unfortunately, the federal government has yet to really commit to this zero carbon future, and is still pinning the future prosperity of Australia really on coal and gas. But as you've seen, there's such sentiment gathering pace with communities, with investors and with companies and leaders in this space, and the energy companies that you know, despite that lack of action or commitment, the future is zero carbon, and we're seeing that more and more on the projects, and some of those will be evidenced today in our case studies. So what is a zero carbon building? There's lots of definitions floating around, but ultimately it's looking at your scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. In buildings, it's primarily your building energy. Where do you source your energy from? Taking fossil fuels out, such as gas boilers and so on, looking at your grid electricity and your network losses. We're seeing more interest in embodied carbon. And then with building operations, things like water, waste and commuting, how you get to and from a building, are also increasingly becoming part of the zero carbon footprint. So two key trends that we're seeing emerging at the moment around this, in addition to obviously the huge increase in renewable energy, is embodied carbon. So placing that emphasis on the carbon footprint right at the start of the building project. And that we're starting to see this now influence the design of buildings, the specification of materials and the selection of products. And that in turn is influencing the supply chain to deliver lower carbon or zero carbon products for industry to use in buildings. There's lots of new tools being developed to make this easier for people to do. An example there is the Hong Kong Carbon Assessment Tool, which Cundall wrote for the CIC, and that's been used on over 200 projects so far in the less than 12 months since that's been available. Another key trend we're seeing is the electrification of buildings. And what we're talking about primarily here is the shifting away from gas boilers to provide space heating and hot water, and moving to more electric heat pump solutions, which can then be powered by renewables. And also, and this is a challenge particularly in retail at the moment, the shift from gas cooktops to induction cooktops. We're seeing this on a number of residential projects, and we're starting to see it more and more in major commercial kitchens, that these operations are turning to induction cooktops because they're cleaner, they're safer, they put less pollutants into the kitchen area, and they put less heat into the space. So they just create more comfortable spaces. This is now being recognised in the new Green Star tool. So for those of you that aren't aware, there's a new Green Star buildings rating tool coming out. It's been the biggest overhaul of the tool since it first came out 17 years ago. And one of the key planks of that tool is around net zero carbon. When it comes out at the end of October, all 6-star buildings will need to be net zero carbon in operation. And then from any buildings registering after 2023, a 5-star building needs to be net zero. And if you register after 2026, all Green Star rated buildings will need to be net zero carbon in operation. And this is in accordance with the Green Building Council's zero carbon pathway. And zero carbon within the new tool is covered in a number of ways. The upfront carbon emissions, which is the embodied carbon, you've got to be highly efficient in your energy consumption. You can't use fossil fuels in the building. So if you want a 6-star building under the new tool, you won't be able to put natural gas for heating and cooking and domestic hot water. All the electricity needs to come from renewable sources, either on-site or off-site, and then looking at other carbon sources and how those are dealt with and how those are offset. So we're starting to see this real shift now in how we design buildings and the level of ambition that you need to deliver Green Star buildings. So that's a sort of brief introduction to zero carbon and the topic we're going to be talking to today. And so now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speakers, who will present case studies, zero carbon projects covering new and existing buildings and a wide range of sectors. So we've got education, retail, office, residential and mixed use projects covered today. So David Collins leads our Brisbane office, and we'll talk about Sustainable Building Research Centre at the University of Wollongong, which is a zero carbon building and Australia's first and currently only Living Building Challenge certified project. He'll be followed by Andrew Thompson, who's going to talk, who heads up the sustainability team in Melbourne, and Andrew will present on Fraser Properties Burwood Brickworks, which is set to become the second Living Building Challenge project and is also zero carbon. Julian Bott is a director based in Sydney, and we'll discuss Stockland's M Park Building A, which is a new office building aiming to be certified carbon neutral, and which was also a pilot project informing the development of the new Green Star tool. Oliver Grimaldi heads our Perth office, and he's going to present on Montreal Commons, a residential project in Fremantle, which uses the One Planet framework to set a wide range of sustainability goals, including zero carbon. Cayman McCabe is a director in Melbourne, will present on Young Husbands Wool Store, which is a mixed-use redevelopment of an existing heritage building in Melbourne, and that's showing that zero carbon is not just confined to new buildings. And then finally, Madeline Janash, who is also based in Perth, will provide an overview of the government's Climate Active Carbon Neutral certification scheme, which can be used for buildings, for precincts, for products, and for organisations. So please remember to type any questions that you have. We'll try to answer as many as we can in the Q&A session at the end. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to David Collins.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre, which was a project we worked on with the University of Wollongong and Cox Architects back in between 2010 and 2014. The project was developed by the University of Wollongong to research, collaborate and link with industry to meet the challenge of improving performance of our new and existing building stock. So the very nature of why the building exists fits perfectly into delivery of a zero carbon building. The project focused on being carbon positive and energy positive, water positive, enhance the local environment and provide exceptional internal environment. The project was designed to be carbon neutral, as I said, from an energy and operation point of view, but also the embodied energy of the materials was really looked at. We looked at what materials, what their impacts were, calculated that total impact, and ultimately offset the impact of those materials following construction. The energy positive nature of the building is really enabled because of the campus that it sits in. The university now has set up a microgrid around that part of the campus where exported energy from this building can feed into other energies, giving them a cost-effective solution as well as zero carbon for this particular building. As David previously said, it's currently the only project in Australia to be accredited as a living building under the Living Building Challenge, and it also has a 6-star Green Star design rating. So touching on some of the passive design strategies, I'll really focus on the energy performance in this presentation. Working with Cox, we really looked at how the space could be planned to enable as much passive design as we could. So there's two main elements to the building. On the left side there's a sort of open hall area which can be used for a variety of different teaching activities. And then on the right side, you've got a more conventional teaching space with a mixture of offices. So one of the key things was to pull these spaces apart, allowing airflows to get deeper into the building effectively by use of that central atrium. Then passive strategies were implemented around the building to reduce the heat loads and allow the natural ventilation to occur. So use of ventilated openings at high levels, which were all occupant controlled, good shading, particularly on the north, which also eliminated the need for blinds, which helped our daylighting. And one of my favorite elements is that the office cubicles, which are there for sort of security and visual privacy, have an open top. So not very great from an acoustic privacy point of view, but that wasn't something that we thought was needed for these projects. So the open top nature of those cubicles allows the natural ventilation to continue to occur even into a small office cubicle. Obviously, appropriate use of materials was done throughout the building to ensure lower thermal loads. Looking at the use of energy on site, obviously lighting are all very efficient, but also the heating and cooling systems, which sometimes do need to be cool, are used. We still need to heat occasionally and cool occasionally. So hydronic in-slab floor heating has been used, and also ground-sourced heat pumps with user-controlled vents. So really looking at what is the best efficiency systems we can use, and then making sure the occupants know how to control that space to be used effectively. Then it comes down to the energy generation on site. So the building includes a 160 kilowatt solar system, which is made up of a bunch of different type solar systems. So as I mentioned earlier, it is really a teaching space, and all of these systems are metered and monitored separately to allow the students to really look at the energy data that's being performed and compare the different systems. So we have a main monocrystalline energy farm on the big piece of roof there on the right. There's also building integrated photovoltaics in the skylight to allow both energy generation and the skylight function. There's facade shading elements which have a dual purpose of generating electricity and also shading the building, and a solar wall. So the kids and the students there can research what different orientations and directions of solar panels can do for the generation. So the building's been operating for a fair few years now, and happily it's been achieving its net zero energy all through that time. So for any of the energy modelers that are out there listening, one of the big things when you're trying to do a university type building is understanding the load. So there was a lot of modeling done to try and predict what the energy loads were, and happily we had our safety factors in the right magnitude, and we've been 15% under those predictions throughout the generation, which has been great. The hard thing to predict though is the different amount of consumption on different months. So we got a fair balance working there, and it turned out successfully. Energy generation has been fairly well where we expected it to be. Obviously it's fairly easy to predict solar generation, and happily nearly every month bar a few very minor months we've generated more electricity on site than the building has used, and then the rest has been exported to the university campus, which is actually about 40% of the generation is being exported at the moment. So that's just a summary of one of Australia's first carbon neutral buildings, a very proud project of Cundall's, and I'm sure of the rest of the project team. I'm going to hand over to Andrew Thompson now, who's going to talk about the Burwood Brickworks project, which is also aiming to be the second living building in Australia. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks Dave. It's my great pleasure, as was mentioned, to be able to talk to you today about the Burwood Brickworks, which is a Frasers property retail centre in the middle ring eastern suburbs of Melbourne, designed by NH Architecture. It's approximately 13,000 square metres of leasable area, anchored with a Woolworths supermarket, Dan Murphy's bottle shop, cinema, childcare centre, medical centre, about 40 specialist retailers, and as you can see in the image in front of you there, the small matter of a rooftop urban farm, which is one of the more notable features of the building, and a fantastic place to visit if you ever get the chance. There's a restaurant up there as well, so you can sample all the produce. The brief we were given on this project was very easy to say, slightly tougher to deliver. It was to produce the world's most sustainable retail centre, if not the world's most sustainable building. And as as to demonstrate those credentials, as David Clark mentioned at the start, this is hopefully going to become the second Living Building Challenge certified project in Australia sometime in 2021. It's also going to be a 6-star certified Green Star building, and it is of course located within a 6-star certified Green Star communities as well. So all of the labels are there to certify what was done. Our role in the project was Green Star accredited professional. We also carried out the embodied carbon calculations, the Green Star modelling, and an LBC feasibility and strategy study at the start, which Frasers have then delivered throughout the rest of the project. Now, particular relevance to today's conversation: when you tackle Living Building Challenge, you have to deliver, as David Collins has alluded to there, not just a zero carbon operational building, but you also have to deliver, or you have to offset all of the embodied carbon emissions in the project. And as our buildings get more efficient and we get greater renewable energy penetration, that embodied carbon, the carbon associated with the bricks and the metal and the glass and the steel and the concrete, becomes ever more important. So firstly, the operational zero carbon. How was that achieved? Well, as you would expect, it's a pretty efficient building, but the real secret, it's not that secret as you can see from the image on the left. The roof is covered in photovoltaics. Almost every available unshaded inch is covered. The only area noticeably not covered is the urban farm, where we had a much greater purpose for the sunlight. Now, what makes this project particularly interesting is that although it's a single-story building, even covering it in PV could not offset all of the operational carbon. Even after the efficiency was driven up and the energy consumption was driven down, the amount, a key reason for that is the amount of refrigeration load in the supermarket and in Dan Murphy's. It simply was too high. Now, you can make the refrigeration process more efficient. You can put doors on the fridges and the freezers and the aisles, etc. But there's still a base load of consumption that just couldn't be offset on site. To address that, Frasers entered into a power purchasing agreement through Rail Utilities and have delivered additional renewable energy capacity. So that's new renewable energy capacity, not just buying existing power, but put in new wind turbines in a farm in New South Wales. That wind farm doesn't just serve or offset Burwood Brickworks, that offsets other Frasers properties as well. But it means that as a net result of building the Burwood Brickworks, there's actually more renewable energy now being produced than the centre will consume overall. And Rail Utilities, I believe now all of their power that they provide to Frasers and other entities is now 100% carbon offset as a result of that wind farm. What makes this additionally quite interesting within Living Building Challenge is there's no mucking around with, is it landlord consumption, is it tenant consumption? You have to account for all energy within the building. So this project offsets all of the tenants' consumption. Now they can buy into the power purchasing agreement. However, if they choose not to, they currently all do, but if any tenants were to choose to buy their own power, Frasers have additionally committed to still offset all of their emissions irrespective of where their tenants source the power. So irrespective of what happens in future in terms of energy contracts, all of the power will continue to be offset. Now, as we mentioned, embodied carbon is becoming ever more important. As the buildings get more efficient, more and more of our carbon gets associated with what's trapped in the bricks and the steel and the concrete that go in initially. So as part of Living Building Challenge, this project will offset all of those emissions associated with the materials. That's done through carbon offsetting approved by the International Living Futures Institute, so it's highly credible offsetting. But as with any kind of offsetting, you want to drive down the amount you have to offset from the start. And there's a series of fantastic initiatives in this project to do that. First of all, 67% of the materials budget was spent within Australia, which is not standard for a retail centre. There were some items that simply couldn't be practically sourced within Australia, but 67% of all materials were sourced locally to reduce the carbon emissions of transportation. There are, of course, lots of recycled content in there in terms of Portland cement replacement, etc. There's also replacement of materials with less carbon intensive ones, such as using timber where possible instead of steel and concrete. But where it really got into some great stories was where it used salvage materials. There was a requirement to use approximately 30 salvage materials, but they actually installed 87 different types of salvage materials. Those range from some things with great stories attached to them, like the bricks. It is a brickworks. Frasers actually managed to track down bricks that came from this very site, including, I think I'm right in saying, some from the 1958 Melbourne Olympics, which they managed to get hold of. Those have all been put back in, and some stories have been added to that. You can see some of the elements added to those bricks, and that's a feature wall at the centre now. As well as that, timber was also reclaimed, and you can see exactly what you can do with reclaimed timber with that entrance to the cinema there shown on the image on the left. And on top of that, there was reclaimed furniture, carpet, planter boxes, bluestone pavers, you name it. Even, and I love this detail, even the coat hooks in the centre manager's office have been salvaged. So fantastic range of initiatives there. I could go on talking all day, but I'm at the end of my time. So I will hand you on to Julian Bott, who is going to speak about the MPark project in Sydney. Thank you.
We seem to have lost Julian at the critical moments.
Sorry, I had an internet connection. Thank you, Dave and Andrew. So yes, on to Stockland M Park. So Stockland M Park is a new office development developed by Stockland, the first of 4 buildings located in Macquarie Park. It's been designed and tendered award to be announced shortly and should be constructed by early 2022. It's been designed by the Danish architects 3XN with a strong focus on passive design and an optimised facade design compliant with the new NCC 2019. And our role has been to be the ESD consultant for the design stage, covering Green Star, neighbours and the carbon neutral strategy. So the reason Stockland have taken the initiative to design this building to be carbon neutral now is part of their ongoing commitment towards going carbon neutral, and to show that it's feasible now, given that the building systems will be operational long beyond when Stockland's committing to those targets. So the building will be finished in 2022, but all of the systems will be operational for many, many years beyond that. And I believe that the team has actually delivered that all within the constraints of the project overall. So the key initiatives for the project has been a participant in the early Green Star Future Focus Early Access Program to test some of these new credits, and in particular how designing a carbon neutral all electric building can work with that. It's targeting a 5-star Green Star rating under the existing V1.3 tool, a 5-star neighbours energy commitment agreement, although the building is actually designed to be capable of 5.5 stars. It's a fossil-free, all-electric building. So what that means, it has no gas main to the building, and all of the systems that would have been on gas are now all electric. So that means that the gas boilers and domestic hot water are all replaced by air-sourced heat pumps, providing the heating and the domestic hot water. And there's a large PV system covering off the majority of all available roof space, which then also contributes to the on-site renewable energy. That then sets the building up to be all electric, which means it can be powered by 100% renewable energy. And then all of those elements come together to make the building easily certified climate active carbon neutral, and minimising the requirements for ongoing carbon offsets and limiting to those that will be needed to cover things that you can't easily do, such as covering the water, waste and refrigerants. So those will be offset, making the building carbon neutral overall. So all of that has been pulled together and delivered and tendered, all within the tolerances of the building requirements and brief, and really a great outcome to drive the industry forward as a leading example of what we can be doing now and accelerate the transition to becoming carbon neutral in operation. So this, like I said, the building will be finished in 2022 and should be a leading example of how an office building can be designed and operated as carbon neutral. So I think I'm going to pass on to Oliver Grimaldi.
Thanks, Julian.
The next one.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon to everyone dialing in from across Australia and across the world, from me in Perth in Western Australia. So from an office building to a residential building, and I'm really pleased to be talking about this one. This is Montreal Commons in Fremantle, just south of Perth. It's a multi-residential apartment building being developed at the moment in the Knutsford precinct. And it's one of 3 lots on the precinct, and the way it's sharing its utilities and community groups make it particularly unique and quite encouraging, actually. It's being developed by the developer OP Properties, a local developer here in Perth, and the architect is Hillam, also a local architect renowned for their residential designs here. It's a 5-storey building consisting of 39 apartments, and there's a cafe on the ground floor, as you could probably see from the rendered image there on the bottom right. Approximately 25% of the apartments will be designed for livable housing guidelines in mind as well. And the building is targeting carbon neutral and also a formal One Planet living recognition. And I'm pretty pleased to say I think this project will be a bit of a game changer in the industry, in fact. So it is targeting One Planet Living. Typically, a lot of these One Planet Living buildings may have, because there's 10 principles, may be strong in one or two of the principles, but I would suggest that this building is fairly strong across all 10, and in particular, the zero carbon energy principle. We've been liaising already with Bioregional Australia, and we've had quite encouraging feedback from them. And the One Planet Living recognition will include the ongoing annual reviews to ensure that the publicly released One Planet Action Plan will actually be implemented for its occupants. So what makes this building particularly unique and special? Well, a fairly common theme at the moment, it's an all-electric building. There is no gas to the building. There are 75 kilowatts of developer-funded rooftop solar PV. But there's also a communal battery, a 670 kilowatt hour communal battery, which sits on lot 2, and that's actually being shared across the lot. So the building will be utilizing blockchain technology within embedded network through PowerLedger's platform. And the whole precinct is estimated to reduce the carbon emissions by about 240 tons per year, which equates to about 6 tons per apartment. On top of that, all of the top-up purchased grid electricity will be certified green power through a local retailer here, Change Energy. And all of this actually is equating to about a 50% reduction in strata levies for everybody. So it's actually showing that sustainability is financially feasible and beneficial for everybody. All the car parks have the possibility to be connected to EV charging car bays. On top of that, there's a communal bore in the top there, you can see. So that communal bore is providing all of the precinct's irrigation water. The pumping of that communal bore is actually powered by the green power, the PV, the battery, etc. So again, you've got carbon neutral or net zero bore water. And there was also 5 waste streams on top of the sort of 2 or 3 mandated. So within the building, you'll have general waste commingled. You'll have the food and organic waste, which is part of Fremantle's FOGO system. And then the developer is also providing the ability to sort out your soft plastics and e-waste. And the building is gaining lots of media coverage. There's media outlets across the world and within Australia. I think as far as even Russia and Korea are covering this building. So as I say, a real game changer for our industry, and I'm glad I've got to talk about it today. So that's it from me. What I'll do is I'll hand over now to Kami McCabe in Victoria, who talk about the Young Husband project.
House, but I'm presenting on. Oh, sorry, I'm muted. Nope. I'm presenting on the Young Husband project, which is, I suppose, a collection of buildings that's centered around a wool store that was built in 1906. So very much part of Australia's history, although it is actually not actually on the Victorian Heritage Register. It's only on the building of significance as we speak, which came as a little bit of a surprise to the development team. It's located about 20 minutes from the airport and about 2.5 or 2.4 kilometers from the Melbourne CBD. But actually, quite importantly, it's also about 5 to 10 minutes away from 2 rail stations, and will be about 800 meters away from the new metro station at Arden once it's built. So the background of this is, I suppose, Impact Investment Group, who are a B Corp certified company, basically acquired the site after a failed attempt by a previous developer to essentially build high-rise residential, keeping the shell of the original building with little other retention of the building. which they felt was not really a socially responsible thing to do. They then, I suppose, decided that they wanted to convert this into a historic precinct. What you're seeing here is a number of images at the bottom of the existing facility. So it's quite a special space, very industrial in its form, but actually got some great qualities to it. And they really wanted to create an industrial village with high quality workspaces, mixed use residential, talking about even barista training facilities, very important in Melbourne. And also opening up an activated laneway with a communal green space that people can take advantage of. It had a sustainability vision that was real world. It wanted to have carbon and water neutrality for the site. It wanted to demonstrate the evidence and benefits of repurposing an existing building. And it wanted to get independent recognition of the strong community benefits that the redevelopment was trying to achieve. It engaged with Woods Bagot as the architects and sought to basically work with various other team members, including Weber, Lucid, and Ryder Levitt Bucknell, and ourselves, to try and basically determine how that actually was to be delivered. If you go to the next slide. How it got there, it basically decided that the best way for it to do so was to achieve its carbon neutrality. It went all electric, albeit it did have some gas for tenants' use from the retail perspective and hospitality, but the base building has no electricity. It took advantage of its large roof to put a 400 kilowatt PV array on the roof. Very strong focus on right sizing of the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. It did some work with trying to improve the performance of the existing facades, albeit it did need to recognize that you'd have to hide the existing structure if you try to actually bring it up to current standards, which they didn't really want to do. And it also adopted a widened temperature control band within the building to take accountability of the passive nature of the building itself in terms of its ability to modify its climate without intervention. It also then embedded that into the tenant leases. The tenants actually were coming into the building, recognized that they needed to actually accept that widened temperature control band. That got it so far, but it's actually gone down the climate active certification pathway, using NABERS as its tool, committing to a 5-star NABERS base building rating for the office areas within the development. From a water neutrality perspective, it did actually find a way to actually get to an on-site water neutrality, but unfortunately the size of the tank and the inability to actually dig a hole big enough without actually affecting the heritage structure meant that it had to actually rationalize that design. So it's actually harvesting rainwater and reusing it, but it's also looking at the acquisition of environmental water offsets to address its water neutrality aspirations. And then from a community perspective and I suppose a more holistic response to the project, it's gone down the One Planet Living certification pathway. And it's used that to try and capture the community side of things. And it's also used life cycle assessment to demonstrate, I suppose, the embodied energy savings and material and environmental benefits of relifing and improving the performance of existing building stock. So that's where it's going. It's hopefully will get delivered and actually achieve its aspirations, but it did demonstrate how, I suppose, the pathway towards taking an existing building and achieving that net zero outcome. I'll leave it there and I'll pass over to Madeline, who will talk to you about Climate Active.
Thank you, Cayman. So I will say a few words about the Climate Active Carbon Neutral certifications, and some of you probably know the Pharma NCOS scheme administered by the Australian government, and Climate Active is a rebranded version of this. It comes as a certification, but it also is a standard, and the standard can be used by everyone. It's also free, available on the internet. If you follow the standard, and then you can then have a formal certification followed through. both the standard and the certification is available for buildings, and we've seen some examples in the presentation earlier today. You can also go wider than that and certify a whole precinct. But then also Climate Active goes beyond this, certifying also organizations and events and products and services. This slide is on one hand showing how to certify with Climate Active, but it also is a summary of what we talked about before. So what you see in that black box there is really a summary of how to go carbon neutral and how to become net zero. There are 3 steps. Firstly, calculating the carbon footprint. So you can only reduce and only minimize what you know. So calculation is very important, and ideally following a set standard or guidance is recommended. I should also mention that Climate Active only looks at operational emissions and looks at real data emissions. So basically based on actual data on actually energy consumption. But that shouldn't stop you from calculating a footprint for a building that's planned or that's in design phase, because you can also calculate a footprint through modeling or through life cycle assessments. Second step then is the reduction of the carbon footprint, so trying to get this as low as possible, and we've seen again a lot of examples how to do that in the presentation today. I think for buildings I can summarize the initiatives, the major initiatives to do that under 4 different measures. So firstly would be the reduction of the demand in the first place. That's mainly through passive design. And then secondly, efficiency. So trying to get the HVAC systems, electricity systems, all the building services as efficient as possible. Then switching fuel, so no gas in the building. And then lastly, having as many on-site renewable energy as possible. And then the third part is when there is a remaining footprint, which is typically the case in most buildings or organizations or whatever you look at for certification. So how you deal with this remaining footprint? Climate Active allows to buy either offsets or renewable energy certificates, and you can buy any mix as you like. So it's possible to neutralize your whole footprint through offset purchases. This is a little different to Green Star and to Neighbors, and also to initiatives like Science-Based Targets, where all emissions from electricity must be neutralized with renewable energy. And again, in this presentation today, we've seen a few examples how this can be done. For example, in Montreal Commons, we had the precinct battery, Empire had the green power purchase, and Berwick Brickworks had the PPA. To get green power to the site. And then there are 2 more steps. So that makes you carbon neutral, or you're building carbon neutral. And then if you follow 2 more steps, number 4 and 5, so having an external audit by an independent person, and then having a public report disclosing publicly how you calculated your footprint, how you reduced it, and how you neutralized it, that equips you to become Climate Active certified. And just as a final slide, just a few examples. So we've seen quite a few buildings that target this. We also work on various buildings and precincts. We work with a few officers from Australian Architects Declare, who've committed to go carbon neutral by the end of this year, and a few other organizations. And also Candle ourselves, we are Climate Active, carbon neutral certified organization in Australia, and we are very, very close to be carbon neutral worldwide. And on that note, I hand back to David Clark.
Thanks, Madeleine. So that concludes the formal part of this webinar. You know, we've heard from 6 speakers on a range of topics. Dave Collins talked to us about the SBRC, the Living Building Challenge project that's been exporting significantly more energy than it's generated since it opened a few years ago. Burwood Brickworks, which is another zero carbon net exporter of energy. Retail centre. Julian spoke about the MParks, Stockland's MPark project, an office building that is going to be carbon neutral certified. Oliver talked about Montreal Commons, which is a very exciting residential project showing some sort of smart thinking, clever ways of looking at how you do renewable energy in residential developments. Cayman spoke about the young husbands and what you can do in existing buildings. And then finally, Madeline just gave us an overview there of the climate active carbon neutral certification process. And you know, we're recognized consultants in that for all those different types of certification. So without any further ado, I'm going to go to questions, and we've had some questions come in. Two of them are so quite thorny questions, always a difficult one to answer, is the capital cost versus payback period for some of these initiatives. So that's always a fun one to answer. So I will open the floor to anybody that's done that analysis recently for the project to give a response.
I might jump in for Burwood Brickworks, not because I have an analysis in front of me, but that project, I was told on Friday that the approximate capital overcost is 10%, which obviously when you look at the world of retail and thin margins and so on, 10% seems like a lot, but equally it is interesting to look at it and consider that if every building was designed to live in building challenge standards, the theory is that our built environment would be entirely sustainable, if not regenerative. So in a way, we're saying that it's 10% from where we are now to what a sustainable urban environment would look like on a building by building basis. And that is comparing it to a standard 5-star building rather than business as usual, because 5-star Green Star is what Fraser's now considered to be business as usual from their perspective. The energy side can be made to pay back, absolutely. Power purchasing agreements are now becoming very common. Covering the roof of retail centres, industrial buildings, etc., is becoming very common because it does pay for itself. There's a few uneconomic things to do with the energy here, like offsetting for tenants even if they're not buying the power, which affects this particular project. As you get into the other elements, though, it becomes more challenging. Water, for example, you have to recycle every drop of water from the building and, in theory, not import any from the grid. There is some exceptions because of the food service nature of the site. That is very challenging to make economic because of the amount of maintenance and EPA requirements required. As you move away from that, then you start to get into a world of more complicated economic analysis of what does it do to the brand? Does it drive footfall? There was hope we'd have data on that, but obviously with the COVID stage 4 restrictions in Melbourne playing havoc with retail, there isn't reliable data. So that doesn't fully answer the question, but the energy side, you can definitely make an equation there, albeit there's some economic elements in this project. 10% was the overcost. Some of the other elements become more challenging, especially when you get into embodied carbon. There's not a straightforward payback equation there.
I'll add to that a little bit as well, Andrew, that we're working on the very early stage concept for a retail centre up here in Queensland that is looking at going for a living building challenge as well. So it loved what the Brickworks did and wants to kind of be Queensland's equivalent to that. And definitely one of the things that they're factoring into their analysis is that it will become a destination for people. It's in a new master planned community. So they're trying to make sure that their analysis considers that more people are going to travel to go there from not just that community, but from further around to go there and actually see what it's about and enjoy the experience. So I think when we're doing these kind of valuations, we need to make sure we're considering it properly. I'd also add that even if some of these projects aren't seeing the valuation cover those costs at the moment, it's all about investors and where they're getting the money from. In the future, the investors are really going to want to put their money more into things like this and these type of projects. So even if they're not considered a payback at the moment, they will be in the future as investors turn more and more of their money into sustainable investment.
Yeah, for me, similarly from a young husband perspective, that's exactly what they did. It was just a long-term view of things rather than the short-term gain.
Okay, thank you. Got a few no more questions here. So one of them was around, do the rating systems consider the initial use of site and demolition? So what is happening to the existing buildings on the M Park site? So I mean, I can answer on sort of behalf of the Green Star tool, is that obviously as part of your demolition, how waste is treated needs to be considered, and looking at the site as what it would be pre-development from a nature and a water perspective. But yes, it's always that thorny question of what do you do with existing buildings if they're not able to be reused for or repurposed in the way that the Young Husbands was. So Julian, have you any sort of thoughts on or comments on what we did with the existing buildings on M Park?
I can't comment on that because I wasn't involved with the existing building elements, but the carbon neutral approach has been dealing with the new building moving forward. It's not really covered under the current Climate Active or Carbon Zero or the Climate Active certification either.
And I think the whole embodied carbon piece is still really developing. So I think as it gets more sophisticated and more people start to look at embodied carbon, I think you're going to start to see that weigh in. But certainly if you're refurbishing existing building, that is recognised as a reduction in embodied carbon compared to using knocking it down and putting a new building up. Got another question here. It's quite a long one, but so it says our organisation has just committed to net zero. However, the majority of our energy comes from electricity and gas from leased buildings rather than buildings we own or control. Do you have any advice for some low-hanging fruit related to how building tenants can reduce their emissions, and also how to engage and influence our building owners to implement larger changes such as carbon neutral buildings? And we have that exact problem because every building we're in is a leased building.
Exactly. I was just about to say we have a similar problem. We have a few of our buildings that use gas, and it is an issue. And that's why it's so important to look into switching to energy in the early design phase, because once you have gas in a building, it's very, very difficult to get that out. You can talk to your landlord and try to get green power into your building, as it won't eliminate the gas, but it will basically eliminate your emissions from your electricity purchase. That's a very big and very low-hanging fruit, because power in an organizational certification is usually about 40 to 50%. And then, just having a conversation with the landlord, trying to get them on board, trying to engage them and show them that tenants are interested into green buildings, into what carbon the organizations are emitting, and just showing that there's a demand to change things.
When we've reported on our carbon previously as part of our One Planet Living, we've always included the landlord's energy, our proportion of the landlord's energy consumption as part of our carbon footprint, rather than ignoring that. So we certainly take into account the whole carbon footprint, not just the bit that we pay for directly. Sorry, Cayman.
I was just going to say, one of the things we're finding as well is that negotiation, particularly with your lease agreements coming up, etc. It's a very interesting market out there if you want to actually change location in terms of the tenancy side. We've had some good success with our Perth office, and hopefully do the same with our Melbourne office. But to use that as a point of discussion, actually finding out what are the credible sustainability objectives that the base building has, and actually get them thinking and get them actively involved.
Excellent. Thanks, Cayman. Another question here around battery systems. I think there was a couple of questions around energy storage systems, and is there any payback with current battery systems? So Oliver, I'll hand that over to you, as your project had that. system
We
in.
did. Yeah, it's with regards to Montreal Commons, we don't know what that payback is. It's still in proposal mode, but generally we understand that batteries at a domestic level still aren't quite under that 10-year payback. However, at a communal level, there's certainly a payback. There's a communal battery storage up at Alkimos Beach through the Synergy. So I think that project is coming to an end, but certainly Development WA and others are thinking about where that battery may get moved to within that Alkimos precinct. So I think from a communal level, it's certainly a short payback period when everyone's feeding into that battery during the day and then feeding off it during night. That payback can be pretty quickly, but down at the domestic level, you can't really get that linear capital cost reduction with a battery, but it exponentially tapers off the bigger you go. And in particular to the battery storage unit down at Knutsford, it's a modular battery. So actually they're starting with a certain size, and when they find that the demand is increasing, they'll start adding more battery modules onto it, which can really help with that payback period as well.
Yeah.
I think I'll add to that. Sorry, I'll go, Dave. With the residential, you're paying just for kilowatt hours stored, which is only a big part of the pie of what energy costs. So if you're in a bigger scheme where you've got capacity or demand charges, so your peak consumption, that's where the battery can really work. If you can utilize your battery to be also peak lopping and reduce those peak loads, that's when you'll see a lot more savings come through with your batteries and be able to bring that cost payback down.
Yeah, and I was just going to say we're advising on projects that, whilst batteries haven't quite got to that price point where they're a no-brainer, the price of battery storage is coming down all the time, and the cost of peak demand energy, particularly as more and more renewables hit the grid and grid stability becomes a challenge. So we're going to start seeing a change in how you charge for electricity. At the same time, the cost of batteries is going to come down, and there's going to be a point in the not too distant future when those two points intersect and battery storage will start to make commercial sense, very clear commercial sense. And so in designing buildings now, design that space for batteries, make it easy to put them in the future, even if you can't afford to put them in right now. We've got a couple of minutes left. I think we're finishing at 4. Is that right, Meg? So, what are, could government drive change like they did with Neighbours by setting net zero as a base for their tenancies? I'm probably not the one to answer about maybe the federal government commitment on that. But, government is a massive, massive sector with schools, TAFEs, healthcare, defence. What are our thoughts there on the impact that government can have by leading the way like it did in the early days of Neighbours?
Well, I think it would drive that, because the government is a significant tenant in buildings, which is why the Neighbours approach drove it so successfully. I think we are going to see the net zero push from councils and cities really being a key driver, and that really is on the agenda. So cities like the City of Sydney, City of Melbourne, and around the place are going to be pushing net zero as part of their planning requirements in the not too distant future. So that even though the federal government may not, I think at that state and local government level, it will.
Yeah, just to reinforce that, there's a number of councils here in Victoria that have claimed, suggested we have now a climate emergency and declared that. And on the back of that, they're basically seeking as to how they actually become part of the answer, not part of the problem.
Yeah, City of Melbourne already have a power purchasing agreement and buy wind power, and I know City of Yarra are now looking to join that along with a couple of other councils. So they're definitely going to be driving this, and just as Julian mentioned, they're looking to put that into planning requirements in some areas of Melbourne at the moment.
And we work on quite a few defence projects, and whilst they're quite a way off targeting anything like carbon neutrality, they do have quite a sustainability strategy and looking at resilience. Obviously, resilience is a big thing from a defence space. You've got to keep those things working no matter what's happening outside, especially when there's major natural disasters and things around like that. You need those defence bases working. So whilst they're pushing at it from a resilience angle, that is also leading into the energy and water and waste side of their designs and making sure they're resilient as well, which includes recycling and energy generation on site.
Right. Well, we've got quite a few more questions to answer, but unfortunately we're now out of time. So we have a record of these questions, so we will endeavour to get back to you with answers to the questions that you asked that we haven't done so far. So I would just like to thank everyone for attending today. I'd like to thank my the speakers who've done an excellent job presenting on a wide range of case studies. I think this is a really important issue, and we'd like we've all got to get involved in being part of the solution to this challenge that we face. Everyone can get involved, so have a look at what's going on the rest of World Green Building Week. Yeah, please, if you've got any questions that you didn't have a chance to answer today, please just reach out and contact us. And yeah, I'd just like to say, yeah, thanks very much for joining. If you've enjoyed this webinar, please share it. We'll post the recording of this online somewhere in the next few days and send a link out telling you where you can watch that if any of your colleagues would be interested in hearing about this. And if you're interested in getting one of the Cundall speakers to come into your organization and do a webinar or seminar tailored to your business, then again, just please reach out and get in touch. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.